Welcome to Empowered by Self-Love, the podcast. I am your host, Jessica Fuentes, and this is the Reinvention Series, a space where self-love, confidence, and leadership come together through real conversations and honest reflection. In here, we explore what truly means to reinvent yourself, not by becoming someone else, but by reconnecting with who you are, honoring your journey, and leading your life with intention. This podcast is brought to you by Empowered-SelfLove LLC, where self-love becomes confident leadership. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing this space, this conversation, and this time for yourself. Whether it is your first time listening or if you've been part of this community since season 1, you are welcome here. This podcast exists as a reminder that growth is personal, leadership is human, and self-love is not optional. It's foundational. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's begin. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Empowered by Self-Love, the Reinvention Series. I am your host, Jessica Fuentes. And today I want to start the episode with one question. Have you ever looked at your life and suddenly realized you've been saying, maybe next year, for years? Maybe next year I'll apply to a role like that. Maybe next year I'll go back to school. Maybe next year I'll start the business. Maybe next year I'll write the book. Or maybe next year, I'll finally make that change. And then one day, you look around and you realize that life didn't wait for you. The years passed. Your children grew. And people around you changed careers, got promoted, started businesses, moved to new cities, went back to school, got the degree. They took chances. And somehow, you're still thinking about the same thing you were thinking about 5 years ago. If this sounds familiar, this episode is for you. Because today I want to talk about something that I don't think we discuss enough. And that is the decisions that quietly shape our lives. And I'm not talking about the huge dramatic decisions. I'm talking about the small ones. Decisions to wait. The decision to not apply to that job. The decision to stay quiet. The decision to stay in a relationship because it feels safer than leaving. The decision to tell yourself, I'm just not ready yet. Because those decisions may seem insignificant when we make them. But when we repeat them for 5 years, for 10 years, or in my case, for almost 18 years, and then you realize that those decisions have become your life. And today, that's exactly what we're talking about. Why playing it safe isn't always the safest choice. When we think about fear, we usually imagine something obvious. Fear sounds like, I can't do this, I am terrified, or I am going to fail, right? But I have learned that fear can be much more sophisticated than that. Sometimes fear sounds incredibly reasonable because it says things like, wait until you have more money. Wait until the kids are older. Wait until work settles down. Wait until you're more qualified. Wait until the market improves. Wait until you feel more confident. And that is where things get complicated because those aren't ridiculous concerns. Sometimes they are legitimate considerations because there are bills to pay, there are children to raise, there are responsibilities that we cannot ignore. There are moments when waiting genuinely is the right decision. But the problem isn't waiting. The problem is when waiting becomes our default response to uncertainty. There is a difference between saying, not now because I have evaluated this carefully and here is my plan, and not now, maybe someday. One is intentional, the other one can become avoidance. And avoidance is incredibly easy to justify when we call it responsibility. I know this because I lived it. For nearly 2 decades, I worked for the same company. I had stability. I had a steady income. I worked with wonderful people. I was raising my children. And from the outside, there wasn't anything dramatically wrong with my life. But there was something I wasn't paying enough attention to. I stopped growing. For years, I talked about getting an MBA. I wanted more professionally. I wanted more responsibility, more leadership, more impact. But every year, there was another reason why it wasn't the right time. My children needed me. I was busy. There were other things I could do with the money. My salary was good. And when I looked for other opportunities, they were not paying what I was already earning. And individually, every one of those reasons made sense. And that is important because when I look back now, I don't think I consciously thought, Jessica, you are afraid. I actually thought, Jessica, you are being reasonable. You are being responsible. And that's why I call it my logical trap. I had built such a convincing argument for staying exactly where I was that I stopped questioning whether the argument was still serving me. I thought my circumstances were keeping me there. And looking back, I realized something else was happening too. I had created a story about what was possible for me. And then I started living according to that story. And there's nothing wrong with comfort. There is nothing wrong with stability. And there's definitely nothing wrong with wanting security. But security and growth are not the same thing. Sometimes what is comfortable today becomes incredibly expensive tomorrow. Not necessarily financially, but it can cost you experience, visibility, confidence, relationships, opportunities, skills, time, and perhaps most importantly, it can cost you the chance to discover what else you're capable of. And that is why I think we need to stop asking only what could go wrong if I make this change and start asking what could it cost me if I don't. Think about that for a moment. What could it cost me if I don't make a change? When we're considering a new opportunity, we immediately calculate the risk of action. And that's okay. What if I fail? What if I lose money? What if they say no? What if I embarrass myself? Or what if it doesn't work out? But how often do we calculate the risk of inaction. What happens if you stay exactly where you are for another 5 years or 10? That's a risk too. We just don't always call it like that. But I had a wake up call. Eventually, the decision I had avoided making was made for me. The company I had dedicated nearly 18 years decided to close several branches, and that included ours. Suddenly, staying was not an option. Not anymore. I had to move. I had to figure out what came next. I had to reinvent myself. And as uncomfortable as that experience was, it forced me to look at my career differently. I started reviewing everything I had actually done throughout those years. Not simply my title, my experience, my responsibilities, my accomplishments, and my impact. And something became incredibly clear. I had been doing far more than my job title suggested. Then I started thinking even further back. Earlier in my career, when I lived in Puerto Rico 21 years ago, I had been the second person in charge of a growing office. I supervised operations. I conducted trainings. I helped ensure compliance procedures were followed. I managed administrative functions. I supported business development, spoke in front of groups, and helped lead. And here's the part that really challenged me. At that point in my life, I didn't even have my bachelor's degree yet. So, how could I have more experience, more education, more knowledge, and more maturity years later and somehow believe I was less ready for leadership? My abilities had not gotten smaller. On the contrary, but my perception of myself had. And I think this happens to more people than we realize. You become so accustomed to what you do every day that you stop recognizing the value of what you know. You minimize your experience because it's familiar to you. You think, everybody knows how to do this. But guess what? No, they don't. Everybody does not know how to do what you do. You know how to do it because you've spent years learning how. So after my layoff, I connected with a former colleague who had successfully built her own business. And during our conversation, she helped me understand something I hadn't recognized before. I wasn't necessarily lacking experience. What I was lacking was positioning. I didn't know how to communicate everything I had done in a way that demonstrated my value. I had spent years assuming that my work would speak for itself. But here is something I wish someone had told me way much earlier. Your work can be excellent and still remain invisible if nobody understands the impact behind it. She also challenged the way I thought about networking. Networking wasn't just talking around and asking people for jobs or favors. It is building relationships, sharing knowledge, helping others, learning from people, allowing people to understand what you do, and creating genuine connections before you ever need something from them. Once I started approaching my career differently, opportunities began appearing that I had assumed would never appear or exist for me. But those opportunities were necessarily new. My ability to see them was. My ability to communicate everything that I do changed as well. And perhaps, even more importantly, my ability to see myself differently was changing too. So, how do you know if you're playing small? I want you to consider a few questions. What have you been talking yourself out of? What opportunity keeps coming back into your mind that you're not pursuing? What have you been postponing until you're ready? Have you confused familiarity with fulfillment? Are you waiting for someone else to recognize something you haven't fully recognized in yourself? And here's a difficult one. If nothing changes, where will your current decisions take you 5 years from now? And don't answer based on what you hope will happen. Look at your trajectory. Look where you are today. Are you happy where you are? If you continue making the same decisions, keeping the same habits, avoiding certain conversations, postponing the same goals over and over, where does that road actually leads you? Because sometimes the clearest way to recognize that something needs to change is to imagine what happens if nothing does. So I want to share with you 5 tools to help you stop playing small. I don't want this episode to simply make you think. I want to give you something practical you can use. So here are the 5 tools I want you to experiment with. Tool number 1, the fact or the story test. Whenever you catch yourself saying, I can't, I'm not qualified, nobody would hire me, it's too late, I don't have enough experience, I could never do that, I want you to stop and take the statement, whichever it is that you're telling yourself, and ask, is this a fact or is this a story I'm telling myself? And if you think it is a fact, I want you to ask yourself, what evidence do I have that tells me and confirms that it is a fact? For example, I'm not qualified for that position. Is that objectively true? Have you reviewed all the requirements? Do you meet 70 or 80% of them? Are there any transferable skills you're ignoring? Or did you see 3 requirements you don't have and immediately disqualified yourself? The goal isn't to replace reality with positive thinking, okay? It is to separate evidence from assumption, because you cannot challenge a limiting belief until you recognize that it is a belief. Tool number 2, calculate the cost of inaction. When you're facing a decision, don't only ask yourself, what's the risk if I do this? Create a second column and ask yourself, what is the risk if I don't? Let's say you're considering applying for a leadership role. What is the risk of action? You might get rejected, or you might discover a skill gap. You might feel uncomfortable during the interview, and that's okay. Now, what is the risk of inaction? Another year without a leadership experience? Another year at the same compensation? Another year reinforcing the belief that you're not ready? Another year watching opportunities go to someone who was willing to raise their hand, someone who was willing to take the risk. And suddenly the equation looks different, right? Doing nothing is still a decision, and it has consequences too. Tool number 3, take the smallest courageous step. Stop waiting for confidence before you can act, because confidence doesn't work that way. You take action. You survive the discomfort. You learn something. And then your brain receives all this evidence that you can handle it. And that is when confidence begins to grow. So instead of asking, am I ready to change careers? Ask yourself, what is one action I can take today, this week, that will get me closer to my goal? Maybe update your LinkedIn profile or schedule a call and have a conversation with a mentor of yours. Research a certification, apply for a position, ask for feedback, go to a networking event, volunteer for a project, speak once and for all in the meeting instead of staying silent. Your next step doesn't need to change your entire life. It needs to interrupt the pattern of staying still. Tool number 4, create an impact inventory. This is especially important for professionals who have spent years doing excellent work behind the scenes. So I want you to write down, what problems have you solved? What processes have you improved? What responsibilities have you taken on beyond your title? Who relies on you? What have you helped your team or your company accomplish? What have you learned to handle very, very well that used to intimidate you? Have you ever demonstrated leadership without having a leadership title? Those questions help you move from here's what I do to here's the value I create. And that is positioning. You are not exaggerating your experience, you're learning how to articulate it. And sometimes you need to see your own impact on paper before you can confidently communicate it to someone else. Tool number 5, borrow perspective. Sometimes we're too close to our own lives that we cannot see our impact objectively. That's why mentors or coaches or trusted colleagues, friends, and professional networks can be so valuable. You can ask someone who knows your work, what strengths do you see in me that I may be overlooking? Or, based on what you've seen on me, where do you think I'm playing smaller than my capabilities? And then listen. Don't immediately explain why they are wrong. Don't minimize the compliment. Don't say, yeah, but no. Listen. Sometimes another person isn't only giving you an answer, they're giving you a perspective you couldn't access from where you were standing. And that happened to me. One conversation didn't magically give me 18 years of experience. That experience was mine, was already there. The conversation helped me recognize what I already had. So before we finish today's episode, I want to challenge you. And please don't go now and quit your jobs. Don't make an irresponsible financial decision. Don't go completely nuts and turn your life upside down. No. I want you to identify one place in your life where you've been saying maybe next year. Just one. Write it down. Then underneath, write, what am I actually waiting for? And be very, very specific. If the answer is money, how much money do you need? If the answer is lack of experience, what experience do you need? If it's a qualification, which specific qualification do you need? If it's time, when exactly will you have more time? How can you make more time? If it's confidence, ask yourself whether confidence is really something you're going to suddenly wake up tomorrow morning and have. And ask yourself one last question. What is one decision you can make in the next 7 days that moves you one step closer to your goal? Not someday, not eventually, within 7 days. Because the purpose isn't to make a reckless decision, it is to stop automatically choosing stillness. There is something I wish I could tell the version of myself who kept saying, maybe next year. I would tell her, you don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to know exactly where the road will lead you. You don't need everyone to understand your decisions, and you definitely don't need to feel completely ready. But what you do need is to stop confusing the absence of movement with safety, because standing still has consequences too. There may be a dream you've been postponing, a conversation you've been avoiding, a position you haven't applied for, a business you haven't started, a boundary you have not set. But I am sure that there is a version of yourself you keep imagining, but you have not given yourself permission to become. And maybe you've created very intelligent reasons for waiting. I know because I did. So I'm not asking you to throw all the logic away. I'm asking you to challenge that logic. Ask yourself questions. Is this decision protecting you from something that genuinely matters to you? Or is it protecting you from a discomfort? Those are not the same things. Your life probably won't change because of one enormous decision tomorrow. It will change because of the quiet, small decisions you make over and over and over again. The decision to speak up instead of staying silent. The decision to apply instead of assuming you're not qualified. The decision to ask instead of assuming the answer is no. To invest in yourself instead of postponing yourself. You need to take one step before you know exactly where the next 10 or 20 steps will lead you to. Because eventually, those quiet, small decisions become something much bigger. They become your career, your relationships, your confidence, your identity. They become your life. So here's the last question, and I want to leave you with this one. If the decisions you're making today become the life you're living 5 years from now, would you still make the same decisions? And if your answer is no, then don't wait another year because you will get the same answer next year. Make one different decision today because playing it safe isn't always the safest choice. Sometimes the greatest risk is spending years protecting the life you already have at the expense of the life you're capable of creating. You don't have to reinvent your entire life today, but you can make one decision today that will change the direction of your life. As we close today's episode, I want to thank you, truly, for being here and for sharing this space with me. If something you heard today resonated with you, allow yourself to sit with it. Reflection is where clarity begins and where reinvention quietly takes shape. Remember, growth doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty, self-awareness, and the willingness to keep showing up for yourself. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can follow me on social media or visit my website. You will find all the links in the episode's notes. Thank you for choosing this moment, and thank you for choosing yourself. Until next time, lead with intention, move forward with compassion, and trust the journey that you are